Okay.
All right, so we're starting the Education Student Services Committee meeting for Wednesday, October 9th at 12 p.m.
Use the microphone.
It is on, I just didn't.
Oh,
realize
okay.
I wasn't up to it enough. And we will start with a roll call. Kathleen?
Here.
Mark Inhart, present. Fleming Godikson?
Present.
There we go.
Present. There we go.
All you.
Look at that timing.
There we go.
Perfect.
He's
Look at that
probably
time.
right outside.
All we were missing was walk-up music.
Well, he did this last night too at the exec
Talk
meeting,
about
yeah.
making an entrance.
That beautiful spray that they were doing out there in the front.
We're picking up at 3.1, Mr. Godikson, if you want to pick up there.
All right, so approval of the minutes. I guess approval of the minutes.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We passed that as well. For approval of the agenda.
Second?
Aye.
All in favor? Aye.
Approved.
All right, information, upcoming board meetings and topics.
So two things we walked away with from our last education committee meeting from everyone. So one, you guys had asked about updates for win time, MTSS and SEAL. So Ms. Murphy is here today. She's going to be working with Mr. Rutz on some of that. The other thing we felt, typically every year we do a huge data presentation in February, right? It's long, it's a long night, it's a lot of charts, it's a lot of graphs. And after we did the federal programs presentation last week, and it was just a little snippet of data for just that, Mr. Rutz and I got talking and said, hey, wonder if we just do small, like 5 to 10 minute data presentations the next couple meetings. So rather than doing a huge one all at once in February, why don't we do a few that are more timely? So what you'll see tonight is a quick little snippet of beginning of the year data, as well as the requested updates on MTSS and WIN and SEAL. And then our plan will be in November to do a short 5 to 10 minutes on just the PSSA Keystone data growth and achievement, because we'll have it by then. That way, when we get, and then we won't do anything in December, and then nothing in January, and then in February, rather than doing an overly long 25-minute data-driven chart, we'll just do our mid-year data. That way, I think it's just easier for all of us, even from a planning standpoint, to take it in smaller bits. So it'll be the same information you would have gotten last year, but rather than one big, huge night, very drawn out, it's as timely as we're getting it. Like we just closed our fall beginning of the year assessments literally a week ago, so you'll get that information today. And then on the 22nd, I think is the meeting, right? And then in November, we'll have the PSSA and Keystone data should be coming. I think, Joe, we said the end of the month.
Yes.
The PVOS data, so we'll get you that in November. So it'll be more timely to when we're getting the data. And then that also will cut down on the sort of the massive long night in February where we can just, again, do a 5 to 10 minute. Here's the mid-year. Any questions, we can talk about growth then. So that's upcoming.
The PSSA data that was just released, that's from the spring, right?
Yes, it's from last year,
And that's what you're thinking of
next month.
next month.
Yeah, we're waiting. The growth data is not released yet.
Correct.
So the achievement data is out,
Okay.
right? And we've alluded to, we've got some grades that are back to pre-pandemic, which is good. But the PVOS growth data is not out yet. So that was usually comes out now, but they're pushing it back to the end of October. So we're going to do both the achievement and the 23-24. So last year's Keystone PSSA achievement and growth will be our November meeting.
The survey that's going out to parents and students,
Yes.
administrators and stuff, there is an educational piece to that as well. Will we get those results at some point?
What do you mean an educational piece?
To ask about, what do you think about the school, the education?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
just like we did last year. We'll do, once we get that back, we've got, the climate and culture data. Yep.
Right.
We presented that last year. We'll present it again this year.
You're doing it twice, right?
We're doing it fall and spring.
Right.
And
Okay.
actually what we'll present around that, do we have an ed committee meeting in December? I'd have to look. I know December might be the month we only have the two smaller ones, but yeah, we can do that for you, maybe January. Because what we did with last year's data is we're doing climate and culture think tanks this year at each building. So one of the consultants you guys all approved was Julia Skolnick, which is the brain-based learning that we do. We've been doing now for 6 years or more. So she's working with the building, so it's teams of building admin, building teachers, counselors, support staff, as well as central admin, and they're going to address a need based off of that data. So, some buildings had really low climate and culture, some had middle, some had higher. All of them, though, have areas they can improve. So they're going to work with a team of teachers, faculty, support staff, admin to work on that this year. So we can give you updates on that as well as part of it. So giving the teachers a voice, the support staff a voice in what the admin, collectively, we can all do to help with the culture in some of the buildings. Yep.
Sounds good.
All right. Going to invite up Mr. Rutz and Ms. Murphy.
Thank you. Why not? Anthony, am I using the clicker or the arrows on, either one will work? Great, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. So this is a first draft of a beginning of the year presentation, just on the beginning of the year fall local assessment results that Mr. Gabriel was alluding to. Again, trying to chunk this information, also because of the timeliness, or I would say lack of timeliness, of a part of the state. Mr. Godekson had mentioned that we do have the achievement data from last year's spring testing for PSSAs and Keystones. What frankly, honestly, is very frustrating is it's October 9th today, and we're still waiting on the growth, the PVOS growth data. And while they're both important, we've talked about this and for years, growth always comes before achievement. So as an educator, we want to see the growth data. We want to see how our students grew from September to June in a calendar year, always, and then add the achievement data to that. So we had information from the state that the PVOS growth data was going to drop on Friday the 4th, and it did not, and now they've pushed that back till the end of the month. So we're hoping to have that soon. But anyway, let me share some data with you. This is, mission, vision, and belief statement. Our objectives and building blocks in sharing this information is always the same. Stakeholders review assessment data to identify student progress and utilize evidence-based strategies in the classroom. Always this make sure that what we're doing in the classroom aligns with state standards. Let me get right to it. This is our fall local assessment data. So this is our DIBELS composite score. You're going to see from left to right kindergarten and the composite scores for where we are. Now, this is just fall. This is a little bit of a change, so I'm getting used to this too with you guys because people who've been on the board for a couple years know that most of this data we didn't share until February when we had our September to January data. So we're just aggregating this out as a snapshot. So kindergarten is at 296.7. Grade 1, this is just DIBELS. This is early literacy assessment with snapshot of where students are in the fall. And I've got a second slide to share with you in a second that'll put this in context. Grade 2, 339.7, and grade 3 at 342.3. What we also wanted to do was share, because I said to Mr. Gabriel, this is now year 3 of some of our platforms, DIBELS, iReady specifically. And once you hit year 3, and Mr. Godekson remembers this, once you hit year 3 in education, you start having trends. You can start looking at trends. You go from coincidences to patterns. So the next slide, what I started to pull for the team is just looking at the whole composite score. We've shared out the whole K-3 composite score in years past at the mid-year point. But what I wanted to do is just pull what the assessments have looked like over the last 3 years and what the whole pot looks like. So what you can see here is in 22-23, our K-3 composite score on the DIBELS was at a 339.4. That went down to a 332.45 in 23-24, and this year was 331.4. So we're starting to see a trend with this.
So our question
Wait.
to you all is, what do we need to add to this to help give context and explain those numbers?
That was going to be my question, was I have no idea what that number actually means. What's a high, what's a low, what's,
We're actually honestly looking for feedback on some
Yeah.
of these for this one.
okay.
So
So what's high, what's low, what's good, what's bad?
Yes, I have
What is
the-
that much of a downward trend? Is it statistically insignificant, or does it actually mean something?
Let me go back to this slide for a second, because I'm just sharing with the team, this is collaborative. It might be better for me to add it in here, because what I have the beginning of the year benchmark number of where we should be. For example, for kindergarten, the beginning year benchmark nationally would be 306, I believe. Right? And that, for here, it's 330. I think it's 330, 336. We're above the national average for the beginning year benchmark. Where would you want that? Where would you guys want that
So-
number?
One of the things that comes to mind here is, this is data that was done this fall, right? Now, would it not be nice to have some of the data from the year before, like for instance, the kindergarten, to see where that comes up in grade 1, so that you can see if there were retentions of information carrying across from kindergarten to first grade and so on?
I don't disagree with that. I don't disagree with Mr. Gosin. The only thing I'd push back on a little bit, because this is what we found here. When we look at this, that cohort is going to change year to year, so it's not the same group of kids. So if I take K data this year, right, and let me go back here, gang. If I look at K data here and I say 296.7, I'd have to look at last year's kindergarten.
You'd have to go back to
Right.
when they were in
But that could be a different group of kids because of students coming into the district or leaving the district. Not that I mind doing that. I would have to put the caveat that you may not be looking at the same group of kids.
How about this? Maybe, I like the idea of the norm on this slide.
Yes.
For
Okay.
each grade level.
Yep.
So like where would the national norm be for each grade?
Uh-huh.
And then we can say we're a point above, below, 2
just,
points
yeah,
below,
put a
we're
line
like right there, yeah.
put a line across.
That's a good idea. Let me
a
put a
trend
line
line.
across that.
And how about,
Yeah.
how about color coding it like we do with the MTSS stuff,
Yeah.
so you can clearly see red, yellow, green?
If you're up above or right
right,
on.
On
We're
each
up.
bar, I can
Yep.
put here, it's 330.
Right,
Yeah.
and then green above.
Green
it.
above it or whatever, a little arrow above it. Okay, that's,
That cut score, well, this composite score changes at each benchmark.
Right.
So.
And that's fine.
The students are always chasing a cut score. So that's where, in my head, I'm thinking, if that's where we're at right now, where do we also need to be in January? So it's like seeing where we're at for the fall, but knowing where we have to go, rather than looking back and following the cohort, but trying to futurely look forward to think about what do we need.
will we know, you said it's a moving target, will we know the January goal now? Or do we have to
Yes.
wait?
Yes, I have my numbers.
So then I
So for
wonder,
example, for kindergarten right now, just for the good of the group, the beginning of the year benchmark is 306 for kindergarten. For first grade, it's 330. For second grade, it's 329. And for third grade, it's 332. So you can see,
That's the national,
that's national.
right? So you
Yeah,
want to
benchmark.
get to those points.
well, that's where that's where nationally
Wanna
we
be.
would
We would
hope
be
we're
right now.
starting.
Yeah.
Yes,
But then maybe we do a line above
I could do that.
that shows where we need to be by January.
Like, I think
But-
first grade
So we
is
can
three-
see
That would
where
be
are
very
we, because there's the current norm and we can see whether we're above it or below it or on it, and then where are we trying to get to by January, so then when we come back in January, we can run the second bit of data and say we actually hit the norm, we're above the norm, below the.
Do you want that all in
Does
one?
make sense?
Yeah, it's very easy visually.
It's
Do you want that all in
Everybody
one
can see
slide
it.
though? That could be a lot to be on a slide.
If it's just lines,
Okay, okay.
is it, well, let's take a look.
Okay.
Let's put it on
I'll
one.
putz with it, yes.
Yeah, play around.
Okay, I'll
with it.
see how it
You
looks
could
to your
also-
part, Mr. Ginhart, how it looks visually.
You could also do K1 on a slide and 2, 3 on a slide, if it's,
Yeah, I could do
because you're
that.
only talking do a fall benchmark.
Right,
And then do a like mid-year, I guess, winter
Yeah.
benchmark, where we're trying to get to. and We
Okay.
can just explain,
right,
let's see what it looks like.
okay.
And if not,
Yeah,
we can
let me
break
putz
into
around with a
slides.
couple styles. All right, I'll try my graphic design.
Ask Greenwood.
Then I guess we don't need the next slide.
No, this was just me putzing around and saying, now that we have 3 years of Dibbles, what the trends are. What is interesting now, this is just, sorry me geeking out here, sorry, I can't walk away from this thing, can I? Does this thing work?
I think so.
It does not, okay.
Is this thing on?
I'll get, what's interesting is when I was disaggregating this data, see, this is what's interesting, is what has affected the decrease, which is nominal, right? Which is nominal, is that our kindergarten class has gone from an average of 315 on their Dibbles in the fall to, they've dropped to 306.
Okay.
It's
so
the
that's impacting.
kindergarten, the incoming kindergartners
Are lower.
are coming in lower year over year. which,
They are unpredictable because we don't know.
No,
Correct.
we don't know what we don't know where they're coming from.
what's interesting is then if you look at this number, I know I've seen the numbers on the back end, so I'm sorry, I'm on the back end, is that in spite of that, we've maintained our growth. So we're kicking back up in grades 1, 2, and 3 enough to make up for that decrease of the students coming in, the deficit.
So I guess there's two conversations around this slide. Is that too much to try to bullet off to the side in a box?
Okay?
Right, because you know how Dr. Bennon's always like, if
Yes.
somebody doesn't watch the board meeting and they just
Yeah.
see slides with no
I would
context,
definitely have to put context here.
or is that too confusing, and is this even worth keeping? Like, is there a?
Well, I've got 3-year trends on the other ones too. Do you want me to go through the rest of the local?
Yeah, let's
Before
see
we
what
make a
else-
decision?
yeah, okay.
Okay,
do
is
that.
everybody okay with me going forward? Sure. Okay. So this was the MTSS pyramid. We've talked about this ad nauseum. Students in tier 3 are 2 or more grade levels below. Tier 2, 1 grade level below, and tier 1 at or above grade level. These are generalizations, and I know that Maura can talk about this more in depth than I can with better expertise, but the general range is 5 to 10% of your students at the end of the day will be in tier 3, 15 to 20% in tier 2, and the goal is 75 to 80% in tier 1. Again, these are ranges and goals. So what we're looking at is we got our iReady fall. This is fall only for reading. So we've got 26% of our students in tier 3 to start the year, 38% in tier 2, and 36% in tier 1. We did this the first 2 weeks of school. Our goal is to move students throughout this year from tier 3 to tier 1. Again, what I wanted to do on the next slide is look at our 3-year trends on where we've gone from 2022-23 was the first year we had iReady to this year, and we can see trends in that manner.
So how do you articulate this? Like, what is this a positive? Is this a negative? Is this what is this telling us?
So, wait here, when you got the
Yeah.
microphone.
Yes, please.
And this reflects 8 grades, right? And versus, it's not.
K8, right, 9.
So I also want to preface that when you look at this triangle back here that Joe showed us, historically, from a teacher's perspective, this is what we're used to. We're used to thinking of we have to get 80% at our grade level appropriate. Tier 2 will be 15 and 20. It's shifting. Really, every student is a general education student. So really this is where we call this the historical triangle. I'm going to be sharing with you what the triangle could look like for language learners and what it could also be for students who are identified with an IEP. So what's happening is now with MTSS, and one of the things about iReady that when we go through this data to look at it, is that all students are taking iReady. If they can, our language learners are taking iReady. Our students with IEPs are taking iReady. Our students with learning gaps are taking iReady, and our students who are at or above grade level are taking iReady. So when I look at this, I see from fall 2022 to 2023 that we increased in the green from 31% to this year 36%. So that's showing that we're increasing our grade level, our students who are working at grade level. This is why the walk to win is so important, because your specialist, our reading specialist, and our math specialist are working with the most intensive need of students. So when I look at this, you don't have an inverted triangle. You have a very equally dispersed triangle that shows that what we're doing is going to be intentional and targeted. I see that we're decreasing the red. This goes back to Joe's point that growth happens first. So we're seeing that we're decreasing the amount from 29% in 2022, 2023 to 26%. It's not going to happen fast because our kids who are in the red are 2+ years behind. Our kids who are in the yellow, that tier 2, are 1 year behind. So we're looking to put our most intensive supports for that 26% for our walk to win. And then the 38%, that's what I would like to see this year. I would like to be able to see our 38% in yellow right here, be able to bump these students down to increase this to be more.
And if I can jump in on that, so our focus last year, because it was really the first year we went all in from a resource standpoint, from a PD standpoint, we put money and time into tier 3, which is the red. So that's positive because we've seen a
We-
decrease from 29 to 27 to 26, right? Because that's where our major focus was last year. Now, as Maura pointed out, we're going to focus our overall focus this year. Now that we've got a better hold on the kids in red and the supports for tier 3, our focus is going to be on tier 2 resources this year. So our hope is that that'll, I mean, that went from 40 to 38, maintained at 38. But again, not that we weren't doing things in the tier 2 kids. We were obviously supporting kids, but our overall focus last year was getting supports for the students in red. So now we're going to get supports for the students in yellow this year.
And-
So we should see that go down further.
And a factor, I remember distinctly, Mr. Godekson asked me this 2 years ago. We talked about this at a board meeting, which was stupendous, is whether we like it or not, this first fall capturing of data of where kids are, mainly reading, but also math, I would say, you're capturing summer slide.
Yeah.
You're capturing summer slide in this. And summer slide nationally, evidence-based, is generalized to be a month of learning. It's not an excuse. I'm just throwing it out there that I always try to remember in all my years as an English teacher, that when my kids come back, we remember we talked about this. You're spending the first 2-3 weeks of school getting kids back into school. And you're capturing some of that summer learning loss, summer slide, we call it, in this first fall data, because we're doing it the first 2 weeks of September.
And I think it's important to also keep in mind, and I think this is a piece that you guys need to really think about, is that up in that red triangle piece, that's primarily special education students. That is a group that's much more difficult to move down into the next level.
Yeah.
Well, and
Good.
I want to reframe that thinking, because that's also, if they're in the red, we want to put the student first. So they're a student who needs tier 3 support. If they're not showing growth in that intensive support, for us, it would be like a group of like 8 students max. Really, tier 3 should be 1 to 3 students. So if we're not giving them an intensive, if it's 8 kids, then we have to think, how can we even intensify it a little bit more? But those students, if they're struggling to make sufficient growth, then that's where we consider, do we need to issue permission to evaluate? And at that point, we've had conversations with parents, and the parents either agree or we're getting the parent input, but
But
yeah.
you already have a group that's already identified up in that.
So they
triangle.
are included in that triangle, but I
Yes.
don't want to exclude the students who, they're part of it.
I get
Yeah.
that, but my whole point is, it's harder to move that group. And we also had to keep in mind, the district has a proportion of close to 20% that's
Yes.
identified.
22,
23%,
23,
Yeah.
Yeah.
23%.
And language learners is also the same
Right.
amount. So
But I
about
mean,
50%.
if you think 3 years, we went from 31 in the green to 36. That's a pretty good
I mean, that's
size
what's
increase,
why it's,
what you want. And then you went from 29 to 26, decrease in the red, which is what you want. And we had a 40 to 38 decrease in yellow, meaning those kids went into the green. So
Right.
we're trending in the right direction.
and I recognize that, and that's why it seems, as you indicated, it might be a lot easier to move that yellow group down in the green group.
Yes.
You know,
And
so-
we see that interesting, if I could jump, a good starting point there, Mr. Goodexton.
Can I ask 2 questions on this?
Oh, yeah,
before
yeah,
we-
please.
before
I'm
we
sorry,
move
Mr.
on? So with wanting to put more resources into tier 2.
Yeah.
The tier 3 numbers are still kind of high, so we won't be sacrificing services in tier 3
No,
to make them available
no.
for tier 2.
No, because we
have
already
enough to
have
do
them in
both.
place now.
Right.
Okay.
So that was you guys, you approved a bunch of different resources, if you remember, in June, like UFly and
Yeah.
Maybe that's just something.
Uh,
that-
95 group.
95%
Yeah.
group. No, we spent all last year money and time and training on tier 3. So that's in place now, and people are using it to support those kids. So now we're going to redirect those funds to tier 2.
Okay, maybe that's just a way to put that forward, so people don't look at.
Yeah,
well,
no,
tier
we're not
3 is
going to
still
pull
high,
from
and you're
3
saying we'll
to
do
give
it.
to 2.
That might be
No,
what people
right.
think. just
We'll
because
make
they
sure,
don't-
and we
don't
can
know that.
figure out some bullets or a
Yes.
chart to explain, but yeah, like an overall focus. So that's now up and running, and it's not decreasing.
Okay,
Yeah,
right, yeah.
that's, we'll make sure.
And can you go to the previous slide?
Yeah, absolutely.
So those numbers, that fall assessment you said includes a lot of summer slide, right?
Yes.
So maybe you should say something about,
Yeah.
because people are going to look at what we should be at and look at where we are
Yeah.
at and go, that's
Remember,
terrible.
that's an end of the year target.
But you don't know
Yes.
that looking at the slide.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
good
maybe we
point.
can add end of
Yeah.
year targets.
Yeah.
We should be at 5, but we're at 26. That's
Yeah.
terrible, but they don't know the context
Right.
Yeah.
of why we're there.
So we've included, it's all
Yeah.
groups, include summer
Yeah.
slide, and then let's make sure that we articulate that the targets are end of year targets.
Yeah. Because we've gotten close to we've gotten close to the targets the last 2 years by end of year.
Yeah.
Our growth has been over 100% by the end of the
Close to
year.
those targets.
And this is why we've done things, and listen, shameless plug, but, you know, the summer book packs to get books in kids' hands in the summer. What we also did is we expanded our licenses, our
Excel, iReady.
exposure, access to iReady and iExcel during the summer for both reading and math. So students, we put out basically a chart for parents that they can still run their students through practice during the summer on this. You try to limit the summer slide as much as possible. You never capture all of it, but to your tier 2 question, Mr. Godekson answered, and Mr. Ginhart, you're on top of this too, so I appreciate that. Let me start first. This is K-8 math, because you'll see a trend in a second. So we're 25% right now, and let me say this, again, going back, and we're still dealing with the consequences of it because it's a virus going through the system, going back to pandemic. I'll say this till I'm blue in the face. Going back to that first year when we closed schools, and schools closed around the country, it was estimated that students were leaving their grade having only learned about 70% of their reading material content and 50% of math. I'm not great at math because I was an English teacher, but take a third grader who leaves March 1st only having 50% of third grade material. Now you're entering a digital world in fourth grade. You're actually at 3.5 years. Third grade, fifth year, right? 50% of third grade. Even if you made up an entire year in fourth grade, you're still behind. Then you lose a month for summer slide. Now you come back in fifth grade, you're only at fourth grade second month. Fine, you make up an entire full year, a miracle. You come into sixth grade, now only at fifth grade fourth month. So we have students in the pipeline that are still that unfinished learning. Systemically, nationally, schools are dealing with. So I just want to put that out there. And to your point, this is our trend line for math
Very similar.
and why we're focusing on tier 2 resources this year, especially for math. We can see we've moved kids, but we've got them now, we got a log jam in tier 2 for math.
I think for these slides, they're arrow down.
Yep.
Reminder in the top box. And then I think maybe 1 or 2 bullets about what we were just talking about, you know, heavy focus on tier 3 last year.
Yep.
23, 24, 24, 25, you know, additional focus on tier 2. And then maybe we just want to say, you know, something about like we do want to see green go up and red go down, right? Like that's the.
And again, like more focusing on the yellow, because the students who are, it's harder to go from red to green.
Yep.
So we want to see the red move into the yellow and then the yellow move into the green, because you can go from green to red. Like I can be a regular education student and I can be a regular education student who came in and I could be struggling, and the teachers can realize that and be like, oh, you need intensive support immediately. So we don't have to go to tier 2 first. There are some times where the teachers are like, they need tier 3. And the specialists are like, yeah, I feel like I need to work with them. The specialists know the students and they can speak to their history. So that's where I'm really looking for that yellow to move into the green and to decrease the amount from 53% to increase that 22% in the green, especially for math.
Yeah, and I think trending in the right direction.
So question, we had all this growth last year. Why is it not reflecting in the fall assessment this year? Why is it not carrying over?
Can
You want to address it
Yeah,
first?
so,
Go ahead.
sorry, so I'm sorry, I don't mean, I'm a really big on questions, so I don't mean for my questions to come off as judgment. So I apologize if it comes off that way, but it's just a curiosity that I have. What number would you like to see for the green to be? Like, if it's next
Well,
year?
I would always like to see those green and yellow be reversed.
Ideally, that's where we're at. It takes 3 years consecutive years, going back to what Joe was talking about with COVID. It takes 3 consecutive years of schooling to be able for a student to generalize the skills. So that's
Correct,
why
but,
third grade's so crucial.
but we saw all that growth last year. I mean, Joe demonstrated it, beautifully, and it just seems like the numbers did not, hold.
There's no magic bullet or answer to your question. And after 30-some years in education, I wish I had it. And if I did, I'd be on a speaking tour right now, selling books. This is a snapshot in time. The thing to remember, too, that I try to keep in mind, because I balance the same thing, Mr. Goddixon, is that there's growth always comes before achievement. And Mr. Gabriel's heard me say this a gazillion times. I get antsy and I get impatient because I want to see the achievement pop. But I have to remember, I stay grounded, that the great growth, a student like me in math can still be growing, but I'm not at grade level standard yet if I was that far behind. So imagine me trying to run a 100-yard dash. My benchmark is 100 yards. I can make great growth in the first time out of the gate, only run 10 yards. And then with great interventions, the next time out of the gate, I've popped to 35 yards. That's pretty good growth. Would you not agree? And then the third time I try it, I've popped out to 62 yards. But I'm still not hitting my benchmark, which is I got to finish 100 yards.
Just picture him.
You don't want to do that, okay? So those are bad. But I think we have to remember some of that. I feel, and I don't have the data yet to prove it, but I've seen something like our Keystone data for math. Our Algebra 1 Keystone data had an increase this year. I think it was about 11% of the percentage of students in proficient and advanced over last year. I haven't disaggregated how much of that was the 8th grade Algebra 1 students. I think the majority was the 8th grade Algebra 1 students at the middle schools, but I've got to believe 5 to 6% of that growth was at the high school Algebra 1. I know for a fact, I believe, English, ELA, literature, Keystone, popped about 11 or 12% over last year. Mr. Gabriel mentioned this earlier. We have some grades in some schools. It could be 4th grade math here. I don't have all the data, I'm sorry. Could be 5th grade literature here, that we're starting to get close to 60% of our students in proficient and advanced, 56%, 57%. We haven't had that in years. I was here in the before times, 2015, 2016, when we were flatlining in the 30s and 40s. So the fact that we're starting to go north of 50% of our students being proficient or advanced, which means passing the test, all this is starting to come together. We're not there, but we're getting there.
Not there yet.
Not there yet.
Also, I'm coming from Philadelphia, so when I broke this data down for the schools that I supported, their fall assessment usually went back to where it was from 2022, 2023. So when I look at this, I'm happy to see that there is a steady increase, which is why it's like, what number do you think would, if we were to create a goal, would be, because it looks like from 18 to 21, like almost 3%. So like next year at the fall, I would like for that green to be 25 because it's consistently increasing by at least 2 to 3%. It's not going backwards, and that happens.
With changing demographics, because I could,
Yes, yeah.
I could sit here and say back in when I got here in 2016, we had 109 ELD students. In K-8,
What do we have now?
over 400?
Over 400.
Over 400, and this is capturing their data.
Right.
So now I have a bigger pool of a demographic, no blame. I'm just saying I have a different pool of a demographic than I did 3, 4, or 5 years ago. And that's going to show up in the data.
Yes.
Can I ask a question? And those students who are at 53% and in the yellow,
Yeah.
there are some students who will never get higher than where they are. I'm not a math person either.
Right.
So, but they're doing what they need to do to pass the grade.
Right.
You would move them back to the red, or you would put more supports in to help
No,
them
more
along?
supports, more supports. We want to get,
Okay, so-
our goal is always to get them on grade level.
But they're here, they're always going to be saying yellow. Some of
Maybe.
the students, like,
Maybe. And what we do is we're either supporting, I don't want to step on your toes. Sometimes to support, Dr. McGuire, you're supporting a student to the point where they're staying where they're at, right? So a student like me who was not good at math, who got supports as a tier 2 student, I stayed in tier 2. I think to your point, I was never going to get to tier 1, but the supports we put in with coaches, with specialists, et cetera, helps keep me from dropping to tier 3. Where now I'm 2 or more grade levels behind, and that we don't want.
Do kids know this? Like
Oh,
where
they-
are?
Yes, we very open and transparent about sharing their data at the 3 testing points. Plus, they do get their, we're sending out the ISRs, the individual student reports. We do send those home every year. They're going out this week, I think, or today.
Put that
There
in
you
the
go.
weekly for you.
The PSSA reports, so they get the nice color copy from the state for both PSSAs and Keystone. So, and again, and Mr. Goddix and I have discussed this, my own bias coming from the classroom for a quarter of a century is I love the PSSA and Keystone. That's an end of the year assessment. And look, we're now talking about waiting on PVOS growth. It's October 9th. The students I taught and tested are already in the next grade. They're already 2 months in. It doesn't do me as much good to alter instruction than it does local assessment.
And it's true, what you were saying, and I also recognize that even the Keystone is a one-day snap.
Yeah,
I mean, it could
snapshot.
be-
Yes. Important. I honor it. As on a day-to-day basis, if I get Dr. McGuire's results today from iReady, I can change instruction tomorrow to help her. I'm still waiting on your PSSAs from last year when you were in 4th grade. Doesn't help me. I love the accountability. I'm not against it, but doesn't help us serve our students today.
Is there a reason why there's such a lag in getting the data out?
From the state, I have no idea. I have no idea. And if you want me to editorialize for a second, I don't know why the state spends $6 billion a year on an assessment system, where if the state trusted school districts and school boards, you as a governing body can say, this is going to serve as our assessment. This is how we're going to track ourselves. And this would be a much better system. All right, I'll stop. Okay, sorry.
Keep it moving.
Keep it moving here. All right, we did IXL. Remember, iReady is K-8. iReady is K-8. We use IXL. We use IXL at the high school. This is grades 9 through 11. We don't test 12th graders. This is reading. They're composite scores for grades 9 through 11. These are a little bit easier to read. To your point, Mr. Ginhart, the number means this. Take a look at reading strategies. A 764 means 64% of 7th grade material. Vocabulary, not 13% of 9th grade material. Am I doing okay?
I'm confused, but that's.
That's okay.
I don't know
No,
this stuff,
then I want to explain this till we're not, because I had to learn it too. Okay? So this is showing that in the area of vocabulary, generally our students, where they scored was 13%, not 100%, because I will put them in 10th grade, 13% of 9th grade material. So they got a little pinky toe right in the 9th grade.
Okay.
This is 764, so 64%, over half of 7th grade material. So they're almost all the way to 8th grade, scoring on an 8th grade level for reading strategies. Writing is 30% of 8th grade material, and was it grammar mechanics? Always the worst. 15% of 7th grade material. Now this is a composite, so this is taking all of 9th, 10th, and 11th as a snapshot together. That's how IXL reports it out.
We have to capture that somehow.
Yeah, it's confusing.
Yeah, charted on the right line.
So why are grades 9 to 11 only at 7, 8
So if you remember,
ninth grade levels?
if I can weigh in on this real quick, I think we're dealing with COVID, but I think prior to that, we only got aligned in math, and elementary math got aligned, secondary math didn't get aligned until 2019. Secondary math did not get aligned until 2021. Elementary reading got aligned 2 years ago. Secondary English got aligned 4 years ago. So our tier 1 wasn't, as we'd said, if we're testing them on things that aren't what the state's asking or not on grade level, then they're going to only perform to what we're teaching them with, right? We had textbooks from 2008 in English when I got here in 2019. It was 11 years ago, man. That was we were teaching stuff from way back when. So we're now multi-years into adoptions that are aligned. But we still have kids in our system that went through 4 elementary math programs for 4 different years, right? They're in about 7th and 8th. I know we say that a lot. I know it's been a while, but like those kids realistically, unfortunately, are still in the system. Like we gave the principals a document this year that said, here's what your kids in 9th grade or 8th grade or 7th grade have had in history here. Like, did they have actually multiple years of aligned curriculum, right, in each area, or was there some disruption? So I think you saw our achievement at the high school was pretty low. Our growth at the high school was pretty low last year. Because again, those kids are still working their way through the system. I think that's a big piece of it. I would expect this over the next couple years as kids are coming to the high school finally that have had like 8 actual years of fully aligned curriculum, that's going to change
So this
dramatically.
is still the,
We are,
It's-
unfortunately, we are. It's going to take,
yeah.
another couple years for those kids that we're trying to,
The end
Ju-
of that.
they're in 7th, 8th, 9th right now. So we got a
Just
few
like,
more years. to
and
work.
just like looking at, say, statistics from a baseball game where your team lost, it's never, sorry, too soon? It's,
That's right.
The series isn't over yet.
yes, sorry.
Yeah, they'll play it.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. It's never one factor. So you guys are asking great questions because we always look at it through this lens, curriculum, instruction, and assessment. That leads to student success. We finally got our curriculum aligned, we got teachers doing great instruction, and we've got an assessment tool. I always want to say this diplomatically, as someone who taught high school for a long time. One thing that I'm looking at personally is the efficacy of the assessment itself. I'm being honest, we've got high schoolers who we're throwing another assessment in them and saying, go take this. We have to examine that. How well are we doing? How effective are we doing putting another assessment tool in front of students at the high school level who are assessed here, there, and everywhere? So that's one thing that I'm looking at this year as well. I'm not saying we're over-assessing, but it's a question. Are we over-assessing? How many assessments are high school, and they're high schoolers?
So you're
10th,
thinking
11th
that
grade.
they're knowing this isn't
Couple kids are clicking through.
affecting their grades, right? They're
Yeah,
just
so
running,
we
they're
were
just
a
running
little
through
bit-
it, not giving it what
No,
it needs.
no blame.
No,
blame.
it's kids. Kids
Fact-
being that.
kids
that
being,
age, being
I
that age.
sit in.
I know it's not gonna affect my grade,
Right,
whatever, I'm just trying to.
two things, you nailed it, bro. 2 things, I've sat in on the testing. I sit in when they assess. There's not a direct correlation to my classroom grade, and there shouldn't be.
Right.
Separate entity. Especially the reading part, English teacher here, they get reading passages, Mr. Ginhart. Click, click. You know, a reading passage is going to take 2 to 3 minutes to read through, and then the multiple choice questions from it. And I'm painting with a broad brush. We're not seeing across the board students put the time in to do the reading passages, and I think that's affecting our reading strategy score.
One data point that's been missing for the past couple of years here has been curriculum-based assessments consistently across the buildings. So assessments that are common across like 9th grade English for Unit 1, right? Because that's really what the kids are going to put their time into, right? Because they're graded, they're tied to what the
Tied to
teacher's
the
teaching
curriculum.
every day. What the work that Joe's doing along with Mrs. Herman is we're trying to finally, now that we have our blueprint courses up and running in some areas, we're going to test run this year with algebra a common aligned assessment platform that are being tied to the assessments that go with our curriculum. So you've got your state assessments and PSSAs and Keystones, you've got your local third parties like IXL and iReady, and now our next phase will be
Yes.
really getting common, almost like midterms and finals, right? But maybe something a
Classroom
little bit
level.
more granular, classroom level, like Unit 1 common assessment for 9th grade English, Unit 2 common assessment for 9th grade, right? Or math or science or whatever. So that'll be the next phase that we can hopefully start to bring in over the next couple of years to say, okay, so the state's telling us they're doing this. These local kind of third parties are telling us this, and maybe they're not taking it that seriously. Well, let's see what they're doing on a day-to-day basis and stuff that is graded and it does matter more to them. What's that showing? Because that would be
That's
really
the
interesting to see, right?
Yes.
Is like,
Yep.
does this type of data match up? Does reading strategy data here match up with what they're doing in 10th grade English? If it's tied to exactly what they're reading and studying in class and tied to what they're being graded.
So is there a way to break these up and work them into just regular testing and assessment, so they don't know it's a separate thing, and then pulling that data back out?
Not as, no, in a straight answer, no, because this assessment is on the digital platform it's on. We do make curricular connections because we're blessed with IXL. It has our curriculum embedded in it, but that's really skills practice. So if I have you in CPM math in 10th grade, Mr. Ginhart, and we're working on, I know nothing about math, inequalities, I remember that. I can put you in IXL for practice, and it'll personalize your practice in that area based on how you scored on the IXL assessment, which you can see in math in a minute. So it's a great tool. I think to your point, to what Mr. Gabriel's saying, if I'm in your math classroom and you give me a curriculum-based assessment, you give me a test for Mr. Ginhart that's testing at the end of the unit, okay, that's tied to the classroom. But you throw me on a digital platform that says we want to take a snapshot of where you are with math. I don't know the validity, the reliability, I shouldn't say validity, the reliability of that. That gives me a third data point, meaning I can then take your PSSA math score, compare it to your curriculum-based assessment score, and then let's say I have your IXL score and it's the lowest of the three. I'm generalizing. It's easy to say, I don't know how serious Joe was taking that. Because look, his PSSA was proficient. He kicked butt on his curriculum-based assessment, but his IXL score was the lowest of those three. He probably just blew that off. Came in, it's first week of school, but we don't have that third data point yet, and that's what we're trying to build right now, is the curriculum classroom-based assessment. You could actually pull data from that and have more accurate data on how students are doing.
The IXL is a tool.
Yes.
Okay. Now, what do we have that's statewide numbers that would kind of tell us a little bit more about what these numbers mean?
Do they have a national norm for this? Or
They
no?
don't have a national norm. We did the correlation
the
study, but
correlation
that was
study.
more for usage. That was usage and how that performed. We had IXL do a linking study, it's called, and what they found last year is, and we use this regularly, we aim for learning one skill, being proficient in one skill a week in both math and reading. So teachers have students on IXL a lot, not just as once you take a diagnostic, it gives you a personalized learning plan. So somebody like me who stunk at math, it would say, Joe, practice in inequalities. Here's some fraction work. And it takes me right into the platform. We didn't have this 3 years ago. We had no intervention like this. So it is great to come right from your diagnostic score, good, bad, or indifferent, and go right into a skills practice platform based on your score. So when they practice in that, when they're in IXL, we did a linking study, and we found that students who were proficient in one or more skills per week were about twice as likely to score proficient or advanced on the Keystone exam for both reading and math. So we know it's working. We were able to back map that to our Keystone scores. I'd have to check to see if there's any national norms.
look
There may
into it.
not be. Yeah, there may not be.
From my perspective, I look at this as if it's a compass and it's guiding, like, so when I see reading strategies being at just above mid-7th grade, I also understand that our 9th grade, COVID started when they were in 4th grade. That's where the shift for reading to learn and learning to read happens in 3rd grade. So they didn't really get a chance to generalize those strategies in 4th grade. And then again in 5th grade, that was hybrid.
Yep.
And then when they were in 6th grade, it's not proper. I call it COVIDcation, where you were out for like 10 days and there was inconsistency between teachers and whole classes. So really the 9th grade is going into this is their 3rd year of that consistent education. So this is where like next year, it's a snapshot to get a gauge, because overall, the trend in high school is that we're starting to see an increase in struggling readers. And high school teachers are content-based. They don't I gave a presentation to a high school group, and they're like, if my kids are on a 5th grade level, then hire a 5th grade teacher. And I said, no, that's where I have to basically teach you how to use a strategy and make it age appropriate for the students that you're working with. And kudos to the high school team, because I'm meeting with them on Friday, because they're looking for ways they realize what they need, and they're looking for ways to start embedding strategies into the high school.
But we're still seeing students, even with grammar at 7.15, they're still getting Bs and
Yes,
C pluses. you know.
absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
it's not like they're failing, and that's
Correct,
the piece that
correct.
we need to convey
Correct.
to the rest of the board as
Yeah.
well, because these numbers are,
Right.
They sound worse than they are.
they sound horrible.
Right? Because then you look, and like Joe said,
Well-
some of these same kids that are like, oh my gosh, 64% of our kids are at a seventh grade level, but then we also are almost at, 60% proficient advanced on the Keystone. So like,
I
So-
think there's definitely
But
a
that's a
trend.
piece we need to get conveyed
Yes.
to the.
we have to make sure that we
Yeah.
articulate to the.
I think for both, and I don't think it's abnormal for me to say this, that I think most of our students, any students, put ourselves in their shoes, right? Your classroom grade is going to be of most importance. How I do on the test, the final, the midterm, for this grade on this report card. I still think the next tier of that, I think there's some importance to PSSAs and Keystones. But I think iReady and iExcel come in third. I think they just do by
So-
the nature of the beast, and that's okay.
So if curriculum-based assessments are the most reliable
I think they can be,
indicators,
yes.
and
They can be.
If they're done well and
Yes.
correctly, which we're working on.
and the IXL inherently has the issue of the kids may not be
Right,
taking it seriously enough.
right.
Can the curriculum-based assessment information be put into IXL to then have IXL do its thing to determine where kids are?
It can't. That's something that we would use Mastery Connect as our own platform to do. But
Part of Canvas.
what you're asking, I don't think IXL can do, but we can do through Canvas. That's what
Yeah,
we're
through
building. out.
Canvas and then through Panorama.
That's what we're building.
So
and
we'll
through
be able to run
Panorama.
these same
Yes.
charts, but on our own curriculum basis.
On our own,
Okay.
on our own,
Yeah.
yes. These platforms don't do it. We'll have our own platform to do it. That's a great
Okay.
Then we
point.
compare all
Yes.
three.
Then we
can look at
compare
the
all three.
State assessments,
Yeah.
CB, the curriculum-based, and this, and see what
Right.
that looks like.
Because right now, we're just missing that third leg of the stool. We didn't have IXL or iReady when I got here 9 years ago. We only had PSSs and Keystones. Students only found out how they were doing educationally when they were in the next grade. We've added this. That's the second data point. The third data point will be curriculum-based assessments. Then we'll be cooking.
Yep.
Then we'll be cooking. I'm sorry. So this is, IXL only gives us 2-year trend lines. They don't give us 3 like iReady. So this is just comparing last year's fall to this year's fall.
About the same.
Yes, nominal.
Yep.
Sorry, this is math.
Okay.
Broke this out because very distinct pathways with math. The other thing to remember with geometry, students are coming out of 9th grade without having geometry. They've been in algebra for a year, so just keep that in mind. That always starts out lower. The last 3 years with IXL, geometry has had our greatest growth by the end of the year, because now they're learning geometry all year. So just to keep that in mind.
That means that grade 10 geometry, only 34% are at 6th grade proficiency?
They're testing out at 34% of 6th grade material on the
They haven't
6th grade
had any
level.
geometry yet.
They haven't had any geometry
okay.
yet.
So that, like Joe said, that'll be the biggest growth we'll
Right.
see, because now they'll have geometry.
And they're at 23% of 7th grade algebra material in 9th grade.
Do we not offer geometry at all in 8th grade?
No, geometry in 8th
And no
grade, you're gonna
honors
have,
courses with,
you'll either have pre-alg, or if you're scoring well
Algebra
enough,
and
you'll have algebra.
Oh, geez.
Yeah,
Which is typical.
yeah.
That's a typical, we don't normally get the geometry.
No, we're now back aligned. Again, pre-pandemic, our high school ran Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and then Geometry, which was out of
Out of
sequence.
sequence.
So, and then this was Algebra and Geometry from last fall to this fall. Algebra is both 9th and 11th. The biggest drop we had was in 11th grade. That's what you see. The drop that you saw from last year to this year in, sorry. In this category, the drop from here to here was mainly 11th grade. They were at about 770 last year to start the year. This year they're starting at 705. Again, not sure why. We look at curricular issues, instructional issues, or if they're just not taking the assessment seriously.
Okay.
All right? And Maura, I think you're up.
Chime in.
I will.
I'm so excited to be here and to be part of the team. As I think I'm in day 27 of, I started on September 3rd, and I've been doing a lot of listening and learnings. And I have outlined the scope of the work from 2023 to January 2023, from when Cassie was hired to basically where we're at right now. So it started in, I called it phase 1, where we worked for PBIS, where all schools got their banner for the PBIS and the school-wide supports that they were putting in place for their SWIBs. Then the coordinator position was hired, that's Cassie. And the MTSS Academy, all the liaisons did the MTSS Academy from the BCIU. Which brings us into phase 2. That was last year. The MTSS handbook was created, which people use, and I have to update that because there have been things that, it's a living document, so we have to continually update it to make the changes. Core meetings happened, and Walk to Win began. Focus on academics for tiers 2 and 3, which we talked about previously, where the board purchased programs for tier 3 and also tier 2. The purchase of those intervention programs for both reading and math, and the Panorama intervention plans. Panorama is a wonderful tool that teachers use to see historical data of a student. And then there's a tier movement tracker. This is also going to move us into phase 3, where one of the things that I've noticed from my listening and learnings is that in the core meetings that every school is having, they're talking about students, and that's great. But if you're talking about students, then you're having a tier 2 or tier 3 meeting. So if you're always talking about the students, we're missing the green. We're hitting the yellow section of the triangle and the red section of the triangle, but we're not targeting and talking about what Anthony was mentioning with the areas that we need to improve on. So it's not like we're ignoring the tier 1 because Joe's work is focusing on that and Rose's work is focusing on that. But in the meetings, they're not looking at the overall trends. So the climate and culture think tank is going to be crucial from a district level, but we can be doing the same thing. And that's where my suggestion to upper leadership was to have the same core meeting time, but for them to then adjust the structure of the meeting to focus on tier 1. Maybe it's tier 1 behavior, tier 1 academics, and then they can strategically plan out their meetings. So we're not having 7 different meetings. We're just structuring one meeting and changing the category of what we're focusing on. So then that'll save time. The goal this year, the past 2 years have been focusing on academics. The goal this year is what in the MTSS world we call full integration, where you marry together academics and behavior. So this year is focusing on putting, I'm using the wrong words, procedures and systems in place so that schools know what to do for a tier 1 student, a student who needs tier 1, a student who needs tier 2, a student who needs tier 3. See, even I have to remember to put the student first in the, and we're looking to manage the fidelity of the systems that have been put in forth in phase 2 and phase 1, and also to evolve the systems so that we can marry together academics and behavior. Walk to Win is continuing. Professional development is happening for teachers with the programs. And the main goal this year, working with BCIU, Denise Harmon, who's our TAC at the IU, is to get the tier 2 badges. We have our tier 1 badge that was acquired, the banner that was acquired back in phase 1. Now the goal is to support tier 2, which goes back to having those meetings, but not just meetings about academics, but maybe tier 2 meetings about behavior as well. So the tier 2 badge, the goal will be to apply for them in the spring so that we can receive them in the fall.
And this, I know, came up last time, sort of what we had dealt with earlier in the year with Willowdale, right? This would be a great opportunity for us to focus on some behavioral stuff across buildings. And we'll touch on that with the SEAL slide later, where we can have principals actually target behavioral needs in the buildings earlier and in a more systemic way. That makes sense.
And the district's mission for MTSS is at the top of the slide, removing the barriers to create pathways. So that's something that we keep focusing on in addition to the district's mission and vision, there's also an MTSS vision. Any questions on this? There's probably more that we could add in there, but from my listening and learning, this is what I got. These are the meetings that I talked about that we're working to restructure. So we're targeting it from the yellow in the academics, and we're targeting it from the red in the academics, but you can see the different categories that we also can be targeting. And then this is our, I noticed, I remember hearing this, like the culture and climate career survey, making sure that we can share those data results with you. That window is open and it closes on the 18th. Last year, we had 331 surveys completed from faculty and staff. 83% of our student population completed it, and 376 families completed it. So that data, all right here.
So we're hoping to beat those totals this year.
Is it being used as a classroom activity to do the surveys?
During
Okay,
yes.
their seal win time.
Yeah,
That's when, they will use it. And then the climate and the career down here, we had 78% students complete that. There's no open-ended questions this year, so we took that out. And the subcategories for each survey section are on the side. So we're really looking at school belonging, school climate, school engagement, school safety for the culture and climate. And then for career ready, we're thinking about emotional regulation, especially since COVID, we're finding students don't know how to work longer than a turn and talk with a peer. So it's like making sure that they can hold conversation and how to have conversations, self-management, social awareness, and supportive relationships.
And if you remember, we had changed the K-5 report card a few years ago to include the PA career ready skills, part of the standards, and those line up to these areas of what future employers are looking for in their employees as well. So this also helps support what we know about our students with for the report cards for the characteristics of a learner and PA career ready skills section.
If the student surveys are being done during school, during when,
Yes.
why isn't the participation closer to 100? I mean, they're in school, they're supposed to do it, right?
School.
Because what happens is that the seal win only falls twice during the window. So if any students are absent, the teachers can try to make it up.
Okay.
But win is held to such a sacred standard that if it's taking the survey or giving the intervention, teachers go towards giving the intervention. We could give them, even yesterday, we talked to a principal, she's like, do I have permission to do this on a different day? Because I think it may take longer for my kids to complete. So they wanted that validation of like, and permission from upper leadership to be able to be like, yes, do what you need to do so that students can complete the survey.
The high school also only does it during English class, or at least did last year. And only have, not all of our kids have English in the fall. So we did just, and again, it was our first year doing it. We didn't have a correct answer to how to do it. I know this year, Dr. Caracappa is like shutting the whole school down for a certain amount of time so everyone can get it done. So we should definitely at least see an increase there, definitely at the high school, because we only did a portion of the students last year because of how we chose to schedule it. Again, first year in it, great return for your first year.
Learning phase.
But learning phase, yep,
Anonymous, right?
yes,
Okay.
yep.
All across families and staff and everything, okay.
This is the ELD. We mention our language learners very frequently today. When you think about the historical triangle where you had the green, the yellow, and the red, this is a triangle for a language learner, where across the dotted lines from here to here, it shows that this is their access level when they take their WIDA score, their standardized test. So 1 to a 5, in order to test out, and Centennial, we want them to be at a 4.5. So the work that we are doing in Centennial is supporting our language learners with focusing on language, so ability on acquiring language before it's like thinking about it being a disability. So we're making sure, because some students are coming with schooling from their previous, their home country. Some students are not. Some students are coming where they're only hearing language spoken in school and where there's a word gap. So this is where we're shifting the misconceptions that teachers have, because they typically have been trained to think of the triangle as the red, yellow, and green, where it's each area of a diverse learner can have their own triangle. So this is the work that's being done for our language learners, and Althea is doing a remarkable job with that.
A lot of times what we'll run into is we'll have a student who we think is lower academically when it's really just a language issue. And then once we, bless you, once we get through the language issue, we're like, oh, wow, you're actually 2 grade levels ahead of everybody. Right? So let's move you into a higher group or provide higher level support. It's just a matter of getting them through the language barrier. Whereas academically, right, that's what Mrs. Tomlinson's working on, is how do we negotiate the language separately than the academic ability? Because we do have a lot of kids coming in, especially from Ukraine and Russia, that were in school for most of their career and were actually very high achievers. They were just forced to come here because of the conflict, and so the war. And so we're getting them and going, oh, well, you know, they barely speak English. But it's like, well, no. They can actually perform. Like once they take a math test, people are like, oh, all right, you're a couple grade levels ahead of everybody here, right? It's just a matter of getting them the support for the language to get over that hump.
And they may be within the tiers longer, like as you mentioned, that a student can stay in tier 2 for a period of time. It's where we want to make sure that they can acquire language, and the language is the primary focus for them, but it doesn't mean that we're pulling them out of grade level content. So they're still, even if their WIDA score is a 1, they still have to get grade level support. And even, it just shows like and our kids who are language learners are there in the foundations classrooms for a portion of the time, or they go back in for small group instruction where they're supported by the teacher. So they're not completely pulled out, because if we're always pulling them out of core content, then we're trying to remediate to accelerate them, and it's just going to widen the gaps. So Althea has structured, and Cassie, they structured it so that the students are being pulled out, and if their WIDA level is a 1 to a 2, then they're getting tier 3 support for just language acquisition. And then as students acquire the language over time, and it takes about 2 years, then the goal is to move them and scaffold them down the triangle as needed. It can take up to 20 weeks to 2 years. They also have a silent period at times. It depends upon the trauma story that they come from their immigration story. So it is, it's not a standardized process for them. And these are the goals that Althea and Cassie created to increase the database decision-making for them, to be able to introduce the benchmarking data for the ELP plans, and also to use the MTSS teams to provide the correct intervention supports for them. Our teachers are also struggling because they're trying to grade them in comparison to students who have been born here and have learned language. So it's being able to also adjust, like, this is how you're grading them based upon their can-do descriptors. So as the numbers continue to increase, because I believe we're close to 24% for our ELD population, we're also working to build the capacity of teachers to be able to support. One school I worked with in Philly had 46 different languages within one building. So the pocket talks have come in handy, and even Kevin, our school resource officer, was like, they were very helpful. So the goals are not just for classroom teachers, but they span across the district as well. And then this is connecting to our SEAL.
Yeah, so you asked about SEAL as well. And so, you know, both those links go to the public parts of our website that share the SEAL curriculum and the parent login. And as you know, we've had Purposeful People and Character Strong in now. We're going on year 3, I think.
Yes.
So while each curriculum does have a scope and sequence of suggested, you know, of what we cover each month and each week, we are working with the principals this year and with Central on developing protocols. So if we have a situation pop up like we did at the one elementary school where there's a certain behavior that's recurring that's around guns or violence or bullying or whatever it happens to be, the buildings have the autonomy to sort of go through a process and say, all right, you know what, instead of whatever was supposed to get covered this month, we're going to set that aside and we're going to jump to another unit and address this issue right now, right? And then they'll get back to the other skills later, But that was, last year our focus was fidelity of implementation. Let's make sure we teach this all the way through. But now that we've done that for a year or so, there's some more autonomy for principals and buildings to say, hey, we're seeing a rise in X type of behavior that needs addressed ASAP. Well, we have the curriculum for it, we have the structures and WIN for it, and now we have a process and the procedures in order for them to make that adjustment and better address those behaviors sooner. Because I know that came up in a couple of our conversations around that night.
Did you have something that would?
Is it?
there something to say
We're kind of
here?
short on time, so let's.
Yeah, so
Okay.
that's just there for you to read, the feedback from a survey that we had, which is just interesting for next steps.
Can I just conclude with something, a statement? Because you know me, I'm Mr. Rainbows and Sunshine here. I like where we're headed. We're making up for a lot. Where we were as a district years ago with lack of aligned curriculum, no assessment structures. Then we got the double whammy with the COVID. But the last 4 years, I like where our trends are going. The growth has been there. We're seeing this now year over year. Hoping achievement pops. We start to see that in the achievement portion, especially in the pieces, A's, and keystones. But the trend line has been looking up the last couple of years, so I'm really happy with at least where we're heading. We're not there yet with achievement, but we're getting there with the trend lines. Thank you.
So we'll make sure we add some of those descriptors to the slides.
Yep.
So that if someone's not listening or watching, it's clear. It's like the trend lines and some of the bullets and things.
Yeah, those are good ideas.
All right. All right. 7.1.
Thank you for all that, Dave.
Sure. No, that's great. You can go.
I was a tooth cave myself.
What's the
A Kappa is related to child accounting.
Okay.
Right, we struggled with our student accounting, and we have so many new people right now. We talked about this last year. We had, with the budget cuts, we cut our professional development and workshop budget by a lot, but we kept a small portion. I think we kept about $10,000, $15,000 out of we used to have a lot more than that for just key conferences. This is one of those key conferences. This is tied to state data, which is tied to our funding. And with Michelle Busetti being brand new to her role in child accounting, and I believe Anand's going to this,
Yes.
our new data specialist. So they're both brand new to those roles. So this is a key one for them in terms of being able to make sure that we are getting all the money we can from the state based off of our child accounting needs.
All right, and I see no problems with the Widener thing.
Yep.
How is that tied to the coursework that they're doing? Are Widener accepting the course levels as they are being taught in Centennial?
This one is this for student teachers, Joe? The Widener?
Oh, this is, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, this isn't dual
Yes.
enrollment. This
I
is
do know.
student, this is
Okay.
student, this is an affiliation agreement, I
That's right.
believe,
Oh,
for
that's
student
right. Yeah.
teachers.
Yep, so we can take them on
Yep.
if they
That's all,
have
it's
interest.
counselors,
Yep.
actually.
Oh,
Yeah, they have
counselors? Okay.
Counselors, yep. That's what this one is. This isn't one of the dual enrollments. But if you read the weekly this week, there's some exciting news about the number of kids getting college credit
Well,
this year.
that was why.
Yeah,
that
not
was on my
Widener,
mind.
but
You then said,
Gwinnett and some of the others, we have
yeah,
some
are
good.
they literally accepting the coursework that?
Some of
we
the
are
students, yeah,
presenting?
some of the schools, you'll see in this week's weekly that goes out Friday. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but we have a large number of kids sitting in William Tennant High School being taught by William Tennant teachers that are getting dual enrollment credits with a few of the local universities that we partnered with, so. But check the weekly, it'll tell you exactly how many kids and which classes.
Did that half go through as a physiology, anatomy?
That is one of the ones that we are, yep. There's an anatomy class, yep.
Right, well, there are a number of library books.
Any of the books? Any questions on, Mark?
Yeah, actually,
That's fine.
you're looking at me, you knew I was going to do it.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
So there's a number of books, a good handful of books with different languages. I saw Turkish, I saw some other languages. With our emphasis on ELD, having books in the schools not English with limited resources to purchase stuff, are these different language books just for all the different students that speak different languages to make them, feel more at home?
Yes, and while they transition to proficiency in English. That's why you're seeing some books in Ukraine
Yeah.
especially.
Oh, well, yeah, and I knew with
Yes.
those students coming.
They've been one or two in Uzbek too, if I remember correctly, but mainly in Ukraine, yeah. It's that interim, Mr. Ginhart, where we need, while we do want them to reach full language proficiency in English, in the interim, we need them to have books to read while they're with us, while they're getting there.
That's kind of what I thought. Makes sense.
Good question.
And there are 3 books that I would like to have pulled. 2 from Klinger, called, one's Melissa, one is Rick, and one is from Log, Alice Austin lived here. They just dive, in my opinion, too deep into sexualization nature, and I just don't think it's something that, as a school, we should be putting in front of junior high school kids as a personal matter that parents should address. I don't think we should be, that gets into like co-parenting with that stuff, and I don't want to.
What's the titles from Klinger?
Klinger is Melissa,
Okay,
the other one is Rick,
okay.
and from Log, it is Alice Austin lived here.
I'll pull those.
We'll pull those.
Thank you.
Yep.
Appreciate that.
So what'll come forward will be the list without those.
Okay, thank you.
We'll move the rest of that list, 7.1 through 7.9.
Yep, to the board, for board.
Okay.
Second.
Aye.
All in favor?